spring of 1944 promised to be decisive on the Western Front. Despite cold nights and muddy terrain, Allied tank crews were preparing for an offensive that could change the course of the war. Among them was the crew of Sherman Tank No. 7, consisting of 4 men: Commander James Jim Harris, driver-mechanic Lewis Lou Sanders, gunner Robert Bob Finch, and loader Edward Ed Mason. The morning streets of Reims buzzed with enemy patrols. Intelligence reports indicated that a German Tiger tank division had set up ambushes in the surrounding countryside, targeting advancing Allied units. Jim's crew had already faced several skirmishes, but nothing prepared them for what awaited that day. As the Sherman rumbled forward, the sound of its engine masked the tension in the air. Civilians had evacuated weeks before, leaving behind empty streets littered with debris and abandoned vehicles. Every corner could hide a Panzer or a concealed anti-tank gun. The crew's hearts pounded with anticipation, yet each man knew that hesitation could mean instant death. Lou, adjusting the tank's throttle, whispered, "Eyes open, Jim." "I've got a bad feeling about this sector." Jim nodded, scanning the horizon through the periscope. "Stay sharp, everyone. They're waiting for us, and we're going to walk right into it if we're not careful." The Sherman turned onto a narrow road flanked by ruined buildings. Suddenly, the distant roar of engines echoed from the woods to the east. German panzers were moving into position. The crew immediately went on high alert. Ed loaded a shell into the 75mm gun, while Bob adjusted the targeting system. The first shots of the ambush were imminent. From the tree line, a Tiger tank revealed itself, its 88mm cannon glinting in the morning sun. Without hesitation, the German crew fired, and the Sherman rocked violently under the impact. Sparks flew across the turret, and the smell of scorched metal filled the air. Jim shouted, "Return fire! Keep moving!" Lou maneuvered the Sherman over a small embankment, avoiding a direct hit that would have penetrated the armor. The Sherman's tracks tore into the muddy ground, sending clumps of earth flying. Bob fired a high-explosive shell at the Tiger, but it bounced harmlessly off the thick armor. Minutes felt like hours. The crew dodged shellfire, returning shots when possible. Jim's voice cut through the chaos. "Ed, load a P! We need to penetrate that armor." Ed worked swiftly, loading armor-piercing rounds while Bob recalculated the angle for the next shot. With a deafening roar, the Sherman's cannon fired, striking the Tiger's side. Sparks and smoke erupted, but the German tank was not yet destroyed. The fight escalated. Nearby German infantry opened fire with Panzerfausts and machine guns, forcing the Sherman to zigzag through narrow alleys. Civilians' abandoned homes crumbled under stray rounds, and the sound of metal on metal echoed across the battlefield. Through the chaos, Jim's leadership was decisive. He coordinated with nearby Sherman units, calling out enemy positions and suggesting maneuvers that allowed his crew to survive multiple near-fatal ambushes. By mid-morning, the crew had already survived 3 separate engagements, each more dangerous than the last. Despite exhaustion and damage to the Sherman's exterior, the crew pressed forward. The mission was clear: advance through the sector, gather intelligence on enemy positions, and hold ground for the infantry. Every second counted, and hesitation could mean the end for the tank and its crew. As the first block of the day's battle drew to a close, the crew knew this was only the beginning. 12 ambushes awaited them, each one a life-or-death test of skill, courage, and teamwork. Yet even at this early stage, it was clear that Sherman Tank No. 7 and its crew were not ordinary soldiers. They were about to write a story that would become legend among Allied tankers. The afternoon sun rose higher, casting long shadows over the devastated countryside. The crew of Sherman Tank No. 7 had already survived 3 ambushes, but the worst was yet to come. Intelligence intercepted earlier that morning suggested the Germans had prepared a well-coordinated trap along a narrow forest road ahead. Jim tightened his grip on the commander's hatch. Listen up, team. This next sector is their stronghold. They'll have anti-tank guns hidden and infantry watching every corner. Stick to the plan, and we survive. Lou adjusted the throttle and whispered, "Feels like a death trap. But we've got no choice." Bob and Ed nodded silently, their focus absolute. Every man on the crew understood the stakes. One mistake, one miscalculation, and the Sherman would be destroyed instantly. The Sherman entered the forest road. Branches scraped against the tank's sides as mud clung to its treads. Suddenly, a Panzerfaust round exploded near the turret, shaking the tank violently. Sparks flew from the armor, and a small fire ignited near the engine compartment. "Fire suppression!" Jim shouted. Lou quickly activated the internal extinguishers while Ed loaded another armor-piercing round. Bob calculated the trajectory. An 88mm Tiger lay hidden behind a grove, waiting to strike again. The first volley of German shells came in quick succession. The Sherman lurched from side to side, barely avoiding direct hits. Jim barked orders. "Keep moving! Don't let them pin us down." Lou maneuvered through the narrow path, occasionally firing the Sherman's 75mm cannon at glimpses of enemy tanks and infantry positions. The gunner, Bob, managed to strike a hidden Panther tank, immobilizing it before it could fire. Minutes stretched like hours. The crew coordinated flawlessly, anticipating each ambush with a combination of skill and instinct. The Sherman's radio crackled intermittently with reports from nearby units, confirming the presence of enemy artillery and additional Tiger tanks along the forest edge. By late afternoon, the crew had survived 6 ambushes. The Sherman bore the scars: dented armor, scorched metal, and splintered treads. Yet the tank remained operational. Jim knew that their survival wasn't just luck. It was tactical discipline, teamwork, and sheer determination. Ed shouted from the loader's hatch, "Incoming!" Panther to the right. Bob swung the cannon, firing a round that ricocheted off thick armor. Another shot, and the Panther's tracks were destroyed. Sparks and smoke filled the air as debris from the destroyed tank fell to the forest floor. Meanwhile, German infantry attempted to flank the Sherman with grenades and machine gun fire. Lou maneuvered the tank to create a crossfire, using the destroyed Panther as cover. Jim issued quick orders. "Ed, keep AP rounds ready. Bob, fire at the infantry clusters. Lou, hold us steady." The crew's coordination was remarkable. Each member acted instinctively, responding to threats with split-second timing. By dusk, they had survived 8 ambushes, an unprecedented feat for a single Sherman tank and its crew. Amidst the chaos, Jim reflected on their mission: gather intelligence, hold strategic ground, and protect advancing infantry units. Each successful maneuver allowed Allied forces to advance further, while German forces grew frustrated at the resilience of Sherman Tank No. 7. Night began to fall, and the forest became even more treacherous. Visibility dropped to a few dozen meters, and the sound of distant artillery echoed through the trees. The crew knew that the next ambush would be the deadliest. German engineers had likely prepared traps specifically to destroy tanks like theirs. Suddenly, a hidden minefield triggered, sending an explosion near the Sherman's left track. Lou managed to keep control, avoiding a direct detonation under the tank. Smoke and dust filled the air as Bob fired at shadowy figures moving behind the trees. Jim barked, "Stay sharp. We've got 4 more ambushes to survive tonight. This is where the real test begins." Ed reloaded the cannon, hands shaking from exhaustion, but precise. Every second counted. Every shot could mean life or death. By the end of the second block, Sherman Tank No. 7 had survived 8 ambushes, inflicted significant damage on enemy armor, and secured critical intelligence on German positions. The crew's reputation among Allied units began to grow. Whispered as the indestructible Sherman crew, soldiers who could survive against impossible odds. Yet Jim knew that surviving the remaining 4 ambushes required more than skill, strategy, courage, and perhaps a touch of luck. As night fully descended, the forest seemed alive with hidden threats. The crew tightened their gear, checked ammunition, and mentally prepared for the final confrontations that would define their legacy. The night was pitch black, the kind that swallows light whole. Only the faint orange glow of distant fires illuminated the forest road. The crew of Sherman No. 7 sat in tense silence, their bodies sore, ears ringing from the day's endless barrage. Jim broke the silence. "We've made it through 8, 4 more to go. If we can clear this sector, the infantry can move in safely by dawn." Lou, his face smeared with grease, muttered, "Assuming we don't blow up first?" Bob chuckled quietly, but the humor faded as soon as the tank rolled forward again. The night was alive with distant howls, rustling trees, and the faint metallic clatter of enemy armor. The radio crackled, a faint voice. "Allied recon reports heavy German armor movement ahead. Proceed with caution. Expect Tiger 1 tanks along the ridge." Jim exhaled slowly. Tigers, the one enemy no Sherman crew wanted to face at night. The Tiger's 88mm gun could tear through a Sherman from over a mile away. The tank crawled forward. Every few meters, Lou adjusted course to avoid ditches and the twisted wrecks of other vehicles. Then suddenly, a blinding flash. An artillery shell exploded nearby, shaking the entire vehicle. "Contact! They've spotted us!" Jim shouted. Bob rotated the turret. "Can't see anything through the smoke." "Switch to infrared scope," Jim ordered. Through the dim lens, the outline of a Tiger tank emerged on the ridge, its massive barrel aimed directly at them. "Tiger, 11 o'clock!" Bob shouted. "Ed, armor-piercing loaded? Ready!" Lou slammed the tank into reverse as the Tiger fired. The shell roared past, missing by inches and tearing a crater into the ground behind them. The concussion nearly deafened the crew. "Return fire!" Jim yelled. Bob fired a round straight at the Tiger's turret. Sparks, a glancing hit. The Tiger adjusted aim, but the Sherman was already moving again. Jim made a quick decision. "Lou, get us behind that ridge. We'll use elevation to flank him." The maneuver was risky. It meant exposing their side armor, the Sherman's weakest point. But there was no other option. Lou gunned the throttle. The tank roared up the slope, mud and sparks flying. As they crested the hill, Bob fired again, this time striking the Tiger's side armor. The explosion lit up the night like daylight. "Direct hit!" Ed shouted. The Tiger burst into flames, its ammunition cooking off in a violent chain reaction. "That's 9, Jim said, his voice steady but tired. 3 more. They pressed forward into the valley beyond. The air smelled of burning fuel and wet earth. Ahead lay an old village, abandoned, its buildings shattered from artillery fire. Jim knew it was the perfect place for an ambush. "Eyes open," he warned. "They'll be waiting for us here." As the Sherman rolled between the ruins, everything went quiet. No birds, no wind, just silence. Then from a second-story window, a Panzerfaust rocket streaked out, slamming into the tank's front armor. The Sherman shuddered violently. "Damage report," Jim shouted. Lou replied, "Front plates cracked, but no penetration." "Return fire." Bob fired high explosive shells into the building. The upper floor collapsed in a burst of dust and debris. But before they could breathe, another rocket hit the rear armor, knocking out their radio antenna. "We've lost comms," Ed shouted. "Doesn't matter," Jim said. "We fight alone now." The next ambush came fast. German half-tracks appeared from the alleyways, infantry pouring out with grenades and flamethrowers. The Sherman spun its turret, mowing down attackers with the coaxial machine gun. Flames licked the sides of the tank. Lou reversed, smashing through a wooden fence to create space. Bob fired again, obliterating one of the half-tracks. Inside, the heat was suffocating. Ed coughed as smoke filled the cabin. "Engine's overheating," Lou warned. "Keep it running," Jim snapped. "We're not done yet." Minutes turned into chaos. Every direction erupted with gunfire and explosions. By the time the dust cleared, the village was silent again, burning buildings casting eerie shadows across the road. Jim looked at his crew, exhausted, bruised, covered in soot. "That's 10, he whispered. They moved on slowly, toward the river crossing. Their orders were clear. Hold the bridge until reinforcements arrive. It was a suicide mission, but they didn't hesitate. When they reached the river, the bridge was already partially destroyed. Smoke rose from the far side, where German troops were regrouping. Lou parked the tank at the bridgehead. "No going back now." Jim nodded. "We hold here. 2 more ambushes, then we're done." Within minutes, the sound of engines filled the air again. 2 Tiger tanks and a platoon of infantry advancing from the far bank. Bob loaded the last armor-piercing rounds. "We're almost out of ammo." "Then make every shot count," Jim replied. The first Tiger fired, striking the bridge and throwing the Sherman sideways. The crew fought to stabilize it. Bob aimed carefully, exhaled, and fired. The shell hit the Tiger's lower hull. Smoke billowed, but it didn't explode. The second Tiger moved to flank them. Lou reversed, using the bridge debris as cover. Jim barked orders. "Ed, switch to HE. Blow that infantry group off the ridge." The cannon fired. A massive explosion engulfed the German squad. The second Tiger returned fire, its shell grazing the Sherman's turret. Metal shrieked as fragments tore through the cabin. Lou cried out. Shrapnel had sliced his arm. "I'm fine," he gritted his teeth. "Keep going." The fight raged for nearly 20 minutes. Flames, smoke, and steel clashed under the night sky. Finally, after a desperate last shot, the second Tiger erupted, its turret launching into the air. "That's 11, Jim said quietly, almost in disbelief. Dawn broke in shades of gray and blood red. Smoke hung heavy over the ruined bridge, curling upward like the ghosts of the night before. Inside the battered Sherman No. 7, the crew sat in silence. Drained, scarred, but still alive. Lou's arm was bandaged tightly with a torn piece of uniform. His hands shook slightly on the controls. Bob and Ed were covered in grime, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Jim looked through the periscope toward the foggy tree line on the opposite side of the river. "There," he muttered. "They're regrouping." One last push. Through the haze, the outlines of 3 German tanks appeared. 2 Panthers and something even larger behind them. Jim froze. The silhouette was unmistakable. A Tiger II, the infamous Königstiger, the heaviest tank Germany ever built. "King Tiger," he whispered. Bob swallowed hard. "We don't have the shells for that thing." "Then we'll improvise, right?" Jim said. "We've come too far to stop now." The crew knew the odds. A Sherman had no business fighting a Tiger II, not even with a full ammunition rack. But retreat wasn't an option. They were the only armored unit left to defend the crossing until reinforcements arrived. Jim turned to his men. "We've survived 11 ambushes. This is number 12. Whatever happens next, we finish it together." Lou cracked a tired smile. "Wouldn't have it any other way, sir." As the first Panther advanced, Bob fired an armor-piercing round straight into its frontal plate. It glanced off harmlessly. The Panther's sloped armor deflected it like stone. The Panther returned fire, missing by inches. Jim barked orders. "Lou, keep moving. Circle left. We'll flank them." The Sherman roared forward, bouncing over debris and shell holes. Ed reloaded frantically while Bob adjusted the turret. They fired again, this time hitting the Panther's side. The explosion tore through its fuel tank, igniting a fireball that engulfed it in seconds. "One down!" Bob shouted. The second Panther opened fire. The shell ripped into the bridge supports, sending debris raining down on the Sherman. Lou swerved to avoid falling girders, barely keeping the tank from sliding into the river. Jim's voice cut through the chaos. "Steady, steady, now!" Bob fired again. The shot hit the Panther's turret ring, jamming it in place. Another round finished it off. Smoke and dust obscured everything. And then came the deep, thunderous roar of the Tiger II. The ground trembled with each of its movements. Its massive 88mm KWK 43 gun turned slowly toward them, almost lazily, as if confident it couldn't be stopped. "God help us," Ed muttered. The Tiger fired first. The shell slammed into the ground just short of the Sherman, showering it with molten dirt and metal. The concussion alone nearly flipped them. Jim shouted, "Back up! Use the wreckage as cover." Lou reversed, tucking behind the burning remains of the first Panther. "Bob, aim for the tracks. It's our only chance." The Sherman fired. The round hit the Tiger's right track, sparks flying, but it didn't break. The Tiger fired again. The shell punched through the Panther wreck and tore a jagged hole through the Sherman's left side. The tank filled with smoke and flame. Bob screamed, clutching his shoulder. Shrapnel had torn through him. "Bob's hit," Ed yelled. Jim crawled to him, checking the wound. "You'll make it." "Just stay with me," Lou coughed through the smoke. "We can't take another hit." Jim's mind raced. They had one last armor-piercing round left. One shot. He grabbed the radio, still static-filled, but faintly alive. "Command, this is Sherman 7. Bridge under heavy assault. One Tiger II engaged. Out of ammo. Requesting immediate air support?" No response. He tossed the radio aside. "All right, we end this ourselves." Jim's eyes locked on the damaged Panther wreck ahead. An idea sparked. "Lou, push us forward. Ram that wreck toward the Tiger." Lou stared. "You're insane." "Maybe, but it's all we've got." The Sherman lurched forward, engine screaming in protest. It slammed into the burning Panther, pushing the wreck down the bridge toward the Tiger. Sparks and flames erupted everywhere. The Tiger fired again, but missed. Its shot went wide as the Panther wreck slid toward it like a blazing comet. "Ed, load HE! Aim for the bridge, under him!" Ed slammed in the high-explosive shell. "Loaded! Fire!" the cannon thundered. The shell struck the bridge beneath the Tiger II. For a split second, everything went silent. Then the structure gave way. With a deafening roar, the Tiger II plunged into the river, disappearing beneath a massive cloud of steam and debris. The bridge collapsed, the ground shuddered, and then nothing but the sound of rushing water. Inside the Sherman, the crew sat in stunned silence. Lou finally exhaled. Did we get him?" Jim nodded slowly. "Yeah, we got him." The sun finally broke through the smoke, casting golden light across the destruction. The 12th ambush survived. Hours later, Allied infantry arrived. Reinforcements poured across the remaining section of the bridge, securing the river crossing. Sherman No. 7 stood motionless, its armor scorched, its tracks broken. But it had held the line. A medic climbed onto the tank and pulled Bob out, still alive but barely conscious. Jim, Lou, and Ed sat on the hull, too tired to speak. An officer approached, saluting quietly. "You men did the impossible. HQ says the river crossing's open, thanks to you." Jim didn't answer. He just looked toward the horizon, where the smoke of the Tiger II still lingered above the river. He whispered almost to himself, "For every tank we built, they built a monster. But monsters can bleed too." April 1945. A year had passed since that day on the bridge. The war was nearly over. Germany was collapsing from every direction. But for Captain James Harris, commander of Sherman No. 7, The memories of that battle still haunted him more than the explosions ever did. He sat in a field hospital on the outskirts of Frankfurt, his uniform faded, his face older than his years. A medic handed him a letter stamped U.S. Army Archives Division. Inside was a single page. For extraordinary heroism and gallantry under fire, the crew of Sherman No. 7 is hereby commended by the 4th Armored Division. Their actions at the Reims River crossing directly enabled the Allied advance into eastern France. The bridge has been designated Harris Bridge. Jim read it silently, then folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't smile. He just looked out the window, where rows of broken tanks, friend and foe alike, lay rusting in the sun. Lou Sanders, the driver, had survived his wounds and was back in the States, running a small repair shop in Detroit. Reporters called him the man who drove through hell, but he never liked the nickname. When customers asked about the scar across his arm, he'd shrug. Just a scratch from a bad day in Europe. He kept a photograph pinned above his workbench, the crew of Sherman No. 7, grinning in front of their tank before the battle. The caption on the back read, 12 ambushes. Zero regrets. Bob Finch, the gunner, spent months in hospitals recovering from his shoulder wound. His doctors told him he'd never fire a cannon again, but he learned to paint instead. By 1946, his artwork began to appear in veterans' magazines. Battle scenes, but with soft colors and quiet skies. One painting titled The River Holds Them showed a sunken Tiger II half buried in water, with wildflowers growing on its rusted hull. Beneath it, in small print, Bob had written, "Not all victories are loud." Edward Mason, the loader, couldn't adjust to civilian life. He joined the occupation forces in Germany, then worked helping rebuild the very bridges the war had destroyed. Locals called him Der Brückenmann, the bridge man. He never told them that one of those bridges, the one over the Reims River, had nearly been his grave. Jim eventually visited the site again in 1948. The bridge had been rebuilt. Steel, modern, quiet. He stood at the riverbank, the wind carrying the faint scent of oil and wet earth. An American engineer recognized him. "Sir, you're Captain Harris, right? This is your bridge." Jim smiled faintly. "No, it belongs to the boys who didn't come home." The engineer paused. "They say one Sherman held off 3 German tanks here. Is that true?" Jim looked out over the water. 3 tanks, 12 ambushes, and more luck than sense. They both laughed, but behind the laughter was silence, the kind that only soldiers know. Years later, 1967, a documentary crew filmed an episode about forgotten heroes of World War II. In a small town in Ohio, they found Jim Harris, now gray-haired, sitting on his porch. When asked about the battle, he didn't boast. He simply said, "War isn't about glory. It's about doing your job when the world around you stops making sense." That day, we didn't fight for medals. We fought so the next convoy could cross the bridge. The interviewer asked, "Do you still think about it?" Jim looked off into the distance. "Every night, the roar of that Tiger II, the smell of burning steel, they never leave you. But I also remember the sunrise after. That was the first time I realized we might actually win." In the National Archives, a weathered document still bears their names. Crew of Sherman No. 7, credited with destroying 12 enemy vehicles and holding the Reims River crossing for 19 hours without relief. Next to it, a small plaque reads, "Courage isn't surviving the battle. It's showing up for the next one." Epilogue, present day. The Reims Bridge still stands, now part of a quiet highway surrounded by fields and vineyards. Tourists drive across it every day, unaware that beneath the calm river lies the rusted wreckage of a Tiger II, its turret still visible beneath the water when the sun hits just right. Each year, local children toss flowers into the river on April 14th. They call it the Day of the Iron Thunder. And if you listen closely, they say, on windy mornings you can still hear the faint echo of a tank engine, the last heartbeat of Sherman number 7, guarding the bridge it refused to surrender.